When armed terrorists stormed Metropolitan Hospital, taking dozens of hostages, they thought the 300-pound ambulance driver would be the easiest target to control. They had no idea they were facing a former Army combat medic who had saved lives under enemy fire in 3 different war zones. The morning shift at Metropolitan Hospital began like any other Tuesday in downtown Chicago. Jake Martinez adjusted his bulk behind the wheel of Ambulance 47, the steering wheel nearly touching his substantial belly. At 300 pounds, he filled most of the driver's seat. His uniform stretched tight across his massive frame. To anyone watching, he looked like just another overweight city employee, counting down the hours to retirement. What they couldn't see was the way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, noting exit routes and potential cover positions. The way his thick fingers, seemingly clumsy with fat, moved with surprising precision when checking his equipment. The habits 15 years as an Army combat medic had burned into his soul, habits that civilian life and 120 pounds of weight gain couldn't completely erase. But those habits were about to save more lives than anyone could imagine. "Tank, you got a pickup at Riverside and 5th, crackled the dispatcher's voice through his radio. The nickname had followed him from his Army days, though now it referenced his size rather than his indestructible reputation on the battlefield. Jake keyed the mic with practiced ease. "Copy that, dispatch. Tank rolling." His partner, rookie EMT Danny Chen, climbed into the passenger seat carrying 2 cups of coffee. At 24, Danny was everything Jake had once been. Lean, energetic, eager to save the world one emergency call at a time. "Morning, Tank. Ready for another exciting day of taxi service for people who should have called an Uber?" Jake accepted the coffee with a grunt of thanks. Danny didn't know about Kandahar province, where Jake had performed emergency surgery in a bombed-out school while Taliban fighters closed in. Didn't know about the 37 soldiers whose lives he'd saved during the Battle of Marja, earning him a Silver Star and a reputation as the medic who could bring anyone back from the edge. Danny was about to learn exactly what kind of man he'd been riding with for 6 months. But the terrorists who were about to attack Metropolitan Hospital didn't know either. And that ignorance would cost them everything. The call came in at 10:47 a.m. Chest pains at a downtown office building. Routine stuff. Jake guided the ambulance through Chicago traffic with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd driven everything from Humvees to medical transport helicopters. Danny chattered about his weekend plans, oblivious to the way Jake's trained eye tracked every vehicle, every pedestrian, every potential threat. "You ever think about getting back in shape, Tank?" Danny asked as they pulled up to the office building. "I mean, no offense, but climbing all these stairs has got to be rough." Jake's expression didn't change as he heaved himself out of the driver's seat. "Some battles leave different kinds of scars, kid." What Danny didn't realize was that he was looking at a man whose scars ran much deeper than extra weight, and whose skills ran much deadlier than anyone suspected. The patient was a classic anxiety attack, masquerading as cardiac distress, a stressed executive who'd convinced himself he was dying. Jake's assessment was swift and professional, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he took vitals and administered a mild sedative. 15 minutes later, they were loading a much calmer businessman into the ambulance for transport to Metropolitan Hospital. It would be the last normal call Jake Martinez ever made, because while they'd been dealing with fake chest pains, real killers were already moving into position to turn his workplace into a war zone. The first sign something was wrong came as they approached the emergency room loading dock. Jake noticed the unmarked van parked in a restricted zone, its windows too heavily tinted for a legitimate vehicle. Two men in maintenance coveralls stood near the staff entrance, but their posture was all wrong. Too alert, too focused, scanning for threats rather than looking like tired hospital workers. "Danny," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying a new edge that made the young EMT look up sharply. "When we get inside, stay close to me. Don't ask questions, just do exactly what I say." Before Danny could respond, everything went to hell. The explosion shattered the hospital's main lobby windows, sending shockwaves through the building that rattled the ambulance. Emergency alarms began shrieking as smoke billowed from the entrance. Through the chaos, Jake saw figures in tactical gear emerging from the van. 5 men armed with military-grade assault rifles moving with professional precision toward the hospital's multiple entrances. The terrorists had just made their first mistake. They'd attacked Jake Martinez's hospital, and they had no idea what kind of hell they'd just unleashed on themselves. "What the hell?" Danny started, but Jake's massive hand clamped down on his shoulder with crushing force. "Shut up and listen," Jake commanded, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded medical units under fire. "We're not going through the main entrance. Emergency exit, north side. Move when I say move, and stay behind me." Danny stared at his partner in shock. This wasn't the tired, overweight driver he'd been working with for 6 months. This was someone else entirely, someone whose eyes had gone cold and calculating, whose bulk suddenly seemed less like fat and more like an immovable force. The transformation was just beginning, and it was about to become legendary. The terrorists' plan was textbook urban assault, multiple entry points, overwhelming firepower, and immediate control of key positions. What they hadn't planned for was encountering someone who'd studied these same tactics from the other side, someone who'd spent years learning how to operate in hostile territory, where every decision meant the difference between life and death. Jake grabbed his medical bag and a portable oxygen tank, his movements suddenly fluid despite his size. "Those aren't random shooters, Danny. This is organized, professional. They'll be taking hostages, establishing control zones. The main thing is..." His analysis was cut short by automatic gunfire erupting from inside the hospital, followed by screams. The attack had begun, and Jake Martinez was about to remind everyone why Army combat medics were called the deadliest healers on Earth. The north emergency exit was supposed to be their way in, but Jake's tactical instincts screamed danger as they approached. Sure enough, one of the terrorists had positioned himself to cover this exact entrance. A smart precaution that would have trapped most people trying to enter or escape. But Jake Martinez wasn't most people. "Give me 60 seconds, he whispered to Danny, who was pressed against the ambulance in terror. "Then follow my lead." What happened next would have seemed impossible to anyone who saw only Jake's current appearance. Despite weighing 300 pounds, he moved through the parking lot with the silent precision of a special operations soldier, using vehicles and architectural features as cover while approaching the terrorists' position. The gunmen never saw him coming. Jake's approach was textbook combat medicine. Assess, stabilize, neutralize threats to patient care. In this case, the threat was a man with an AK-47 who'd never experienced what it felt like to have 300 pounds of former Army combat medic land on him like a falling building. The struggle lasted less than 10 seconds. When it was over, Jake was checking the unconscious terrorist's pulse with professional detachment while securing his weapon. Old habits died hard. Even enemy combatants deserved medical assessment. 1 down, 4 to go. And the terrorists still had no idea what they were really dealing with. "Jesus Christ, Tank," Danny whispered as they slipped through the emergency exit, What the hell was that? That, Jake replied calmly, was Tuesday morning turning into Afghanistan. And Afghanistan was a place where Jake Martinez had never lost a patient. Today wouldn't be any different. Inside the hospital, chaos reigned. The terrorists had executed their plan with brutal efficiency. The main lobby was destroyed, staff and patients were being herded into the central atrium as hostages, and armed men controlled every major corridor. It was a perfect siege situation designed to give them maximum leverage over law enforcement. Perfect, except for one small detail they'd overlooked. They'd just trapped themselves inside, with the wrong medic. Jake led Danny through service corridors he'd memorized during months of routine transports, moving toward the sound of gunfire and screaming with the deliberate pace of someone who'd learned that panic killed more people than bullets. His medical bag was slung across one massive shoulder, the captured AK-47 held with familiar competence in hands that had once performed surgery while mortars exploded overhead. "The ICU," Jake explained quietly as they moved. "They'll establish their command post somewhere with good sightlines and limited access points. ICU has both, plus valuable hostages, critical patients they can threaten." Danny was struggling to process this transformation. "Tank, how do you know all this? Who are you really?" Jake paused at a corridor junction, listening for movement patterns that would tell him where the terrorists had positioned themselves. "Army Combat Medic, 15th Medical Battalion. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Danny caught the steel underneath. "I used to save lives in places where people were actively trying to end them." What he didn't mention was that sometimes saving lives meant ending others, and the terrorists were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The first hostages they encountered were in radiology, 2 technicians and an elderly patient trapped when the attack began. The terrorist guarding them was young, nervous, clearly not expecting resistance from hospital staff. He was scanning the main corridor when Jake appeared behind him like a mountain, materializing from thin air. "Sleep tight," Jake murmured as his thick arms applied a textbook sleeper hold. The gunman dropped without a sound. "Oh my God," one of the technicians gasped as Jake secured the man's weapon. "Are you a cop?" "Better," Danny answered, staring at his partner with new respect. "He's Tank." The technicians had no idea what that nickname really meant, but the terrorists were about to find out. This was just the beginning. What the terrorists were about to discover was that their perfectly planned hospital siege had one massive flaw. They'd trapped themselves inside with someone who'd spent his entire military career learning how to operate in hostile territory. And Jake Martinez was about to remind them why Army combat medics were known as the most dangerous healers on Earth. The central atrium of Metropolitan Hospital had become a nightmare. 43 hostages, patients, staff, and visitors sat on the polished floor under the watchful eyes of 2 terrorists. The leader, a man called Rashid, stood on the registration desk, addressing his captives with cold authority. "You will remain calm and silent," he announced in accented English. "Any resistance will result in immediate execution. We are not here to harm you if you cooperate." The hostages huddled together in terror. Nurses still in their scrubs, patients in hospital gowns, family members who'd been visiting loved ones when the attack began. Among them sat Dr. Sarah Martinez, head of emergency medicine, whose calm competence under pressure had saved thousands of lives over her 20-year career. What none of them knew was that her husband of 8 years was currently moving through the hospital's maintenance tunnels like a force of nature. Jake had spent the last 15 minutes systematically neutralizing the terrorists' perimeter guards. 3 men down, secured with zip ties from his medical kit. Their weapons redistributed to the growing collection he was accumulating. Each takedown had been silent, professional, executed with the same precision he'd once used to perform field surgery under fire. The terrorists still thought they had 5 men. They actually had 2, and their tactical advantage was disappearing faster than they could realize. "How many more?" Danny whispered, as they crouched in a supply closet, monitoring terrorist radio chatter through a captured earpiece. "2 in the atrium with the main group of hostages," Jake replied, his voice clinical. "Leader plus 1 backup. Primary threat is in the ICU. That's their command center." Jake's assessment was confirmed when his wife's voice came through on the terrorist communications channel, speaking with the controlled comm she used during medical emergencies. "The patient in room 314 needs immediate insulin. Without it, he'll go into diabetic shock within the hour." Rashid's response was predictably brutal. "Then he dies. Perhaps that will encourage the authorities to meet our demands more quickly." Something shifted in Jake's expression. Danny had seen controlled anger before, but this was different. This was the cold fury of a man who'd spent years watching good people die because of evil men's choices. "Change of plans," Jake said quietly. "We're going active." What happened next would become legend in both medical and military circles. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Jake Martinez, the overweight ambulance driver who struggled to climb stairs, became Staff Sergeant Martinez, 15th Medical Battalion, recipient of the Silver Star for Valor under fire. His movements became fluid, economical, every action serving a specific tactical purpose. "Here's what's going to happen," he explained to Danny as he distributed medical supplies and weapons. "I'm going to create a distraction in the East Wing. When they respond, you're going to lead the non-critical hostages out through the kitchen loading dock. Can you handle that?" Danny nodded, though his hands were shaking. "What about the others? What about your wife?" Jake's smile was predatory. "Leave that to me. Some lessons you never forget." The terrorists were about to receive an education they'd never survive to use. The diversion began at 11:47 a.m. when Jake triggered the fire suppression system in the East Wing, filling 3 floors with smoke and confusion. As predicted, 2 of the terrorists moved to investigate, leaving Rashid and 1 guard with the hostages. That's when Jake Martinez reminded everyone why Army combat medics were considered among the most dangerous soldiers in the world. His approach through the atrium's upper level was invisible. Years of battlefield experience had taught him how to use architectural features and distraction to move unseen. The remaining guard never knew what hit him when 300 pounds of former Special Operations medic landed on him from the second-floor balcony. Rashid spun toward the commotion, raising his weapon, but froze when he found himself staring down the barrel of his own man's AK-47, held by someone who clearly knew how to use it. The terrorist leader was looking death in the face, and death was wearing a hospital uniform. "Everybody stay calm," Jake announced to the hostages, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Medical personnel, start triage assessment on the injured. Everyone else move toward the exits in an orderly fashion." Rashid's eyes widened as he took in Jake's appearance. The massive bulk, the hospital uniform, the professional competence with which he handled the assault rifle. "You're not security. You're not police. Who are you?" Jake's smile was cold as winter. "I'm the guy who's been dealing with your type for 15 years. Army combat medic, 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've seen what happens when terrorists threaten innocent people. The terrorist leader tried to raise his weapon, but Jake's shot was precise. Wounding, not killing, disabling Rashid's gun arm with surgical accuracy. Stay down. You're going to need medical attention. Even in combat, once a medic, always a medic. But the terrorists rushing back from the East Wing were about to learn the other half of that equation. As chaos erupted around them, Jake moved through the hostages with practiced efficiency. His medical training took over, assessing injuries, providing immediate care, coordinating evacuation of the most vulnerable. But his eyes never stopped scanning for threats. His tactical awareness never diminished. Dr. Sarah Martinez stared at her husband in amazement as he worked. She'd known about his military service, of course, but had never seen this side of him, the soldier who'd earned his reputation in the world's most dangerous places. "Behind you!" she called out as the 2 terrorists from the East Wing returned, having realized the diversion. Jake spun, providing covering fire while shepherding the last civilians to safety. The firefight was brief but intense. 3 experienced killers against 1 overweight medic who'd learned his trade in places where missing meant dying. When the smoke cleared, Jake was still standing. The terrorists were not. "Medical attention for the wounded," he called out, already moving toward the injured terrorist leader. "Even the bad guys get first aid. That's the rule." It was over. The siege that was supposed to terrify Chicago had lasted less than 40 minutes against 1 overweight medic who remembered how to be a soldier. Chicago's SWAT arrived to find a scene that defied their expectations. Hostages safe, terrorists neutralized or in custody, and a 300-pound ambulance driver calmly performing medical triage while his wife coordinated patient care. "Sir?" The SWAT commander approached Jake cautiously. "We're going to need a statement about what happened here." Jake looked up from bandaging Rashid's wounded arm, his expression returning to the mild demeanor his co-workers knew. Terrorists attacked a hospital. Medical staff responded according to training. Sometimes that training includes more than just first aid. The story made national news, though the details were carefully controlled. Jake Martinez became a brief media sensation, the unlikely hero who'd saved dozens of lives during a terrorist attack. But he declined most interviews, preferring to return to his normal routine of driving ambulance calls and dealing with everyday emergencies. "You could have told me," Danny said during their next shift together. "About your background, I mean." Jake adjusted his bulk behind the steering wheel, the same tired gesture his partner had seen hundreds of times. "Some things are better left in the past, kid. I'm not that soldier anymore." But Danny noticed things now that he'd missed before. The way Jake's eyes never stopped moving, the precision with which he handled medical equipment, the quiet authority in his voice when dealing with difficult situations. "Maybe not," Danny replied. But when it mattered, he was still there. Jake was quiet for a long moment, remembering the weight of the rifle in his hands, the familiar rush of combat, the satisfaction of protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. "Yeah," he said finally. "I guess he was." And somewhere in the city, other predators were taking note. The fat ambulance driver who'd single-handedly stopped a terrorist attack wasn't someone to underestimate. Ever. Metropolitan Hospital returned to normal operations within a week, but something had changed. Staff members walked a little taller, knowing they'd witnessed something extraordinary. Patients received care from people who'd proven they would literally fight to protect those under their care. and Jake Martinez continued driving Ambulance 47, carrying his hidden past and his hard-won peace through the streets of Chicago. To most people, he was still just Tank, the overweight driver who somehow always seemed to know exactly what to do in a crisis. But in the darker corners of the world, word spread about what had happened at Metropolitan Hospital. About the medic who'd never really stopped being a soldier, who'd reminded everyone that some people should never be underestimated. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you'd never suspect. And sometimes the best weapon against evil isn't a gun or a badge, it's a healer who's willing to fight. The war might have been over for Jake Martinez, but when evil came calling, the warrior was still there, waiting beneath the surface, ready to prove that some things, like protecting innocent life, are always worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We prepare a new story for you every day. Hit the like button and share your thoughts with us in the comments. You can help your friends discover these exciting narratives by sharing our stories on your social media accounts. See you in our next story.